Welcome to the Cyber Tech Podcast, inside the minds of everyday IT and cyber pros. Your host, Mike Fierros, will dive deep into the world of IT and cybersecurity, bringing you the stories and insights of professionals who are making waves in the field. From how they got started, to their most exciting projects, and their advice for aspiring tech enthusiasts, we cover it all. So, whether you're an industry veteran or just getting started, join us as we explore the fascinating minds behind the technology that shapes our world. Let's get started.
Hey, what's up, guys? How's it going? Mike again with yet another Cyber Tech podcast inside the minds of everyday IT and cyber pros. Thanks, guys, for all the support and encouragement on LinkedIn, social media, Facebook, Instagram. Little quick updates here before we get on this episode 9 podcast episode. The storefront for Cyber Tech podcast merchandise, it's almost done. So I'll be, I think in January or February, the latest, I'll be launching the storefront. So I know a couple of you guys asked me about hats and t-shirts and stickers and stuff like that. So it'll be really exciting to open up podcast storefront. So that's coming up soon. And also January's guests coming on this podcast, lining up now. So I have some really good guests coming here pretty soon. A lot of special guests that you guys may or may have not heard of. This episode is episode number 9. And this gentleman right here, I've worked with before at GlobalMac IT. He comes from the MSP, MSSP world. This gentleman right here, his name is Daniel Umek. He's a director of operations for Alpha and Omega Computer Consultants. How's it going, Dan?
Good, man. Happy to be here. I love watching the journey of the podcast, and it's kind of a little surreal. I'm super excited.
For sure. I know it's been a while since we talked. I think almost a year now, right?
Yeah, I think we've had some chit chat back and forth here and there, but yeah, I mean, we've both been branching out into new enterprises and new exciting times. So, it's kind of like all streams flow back together eventually, sort of thing.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. And Dan, those people out there that don't know you, kind of give a little quick background about yourself and how you got into IT.
Yeah, originally kind of came out of the sort of digital marketing space, spent many years doing social media marketing, some amount of like web design and SEO and things like that. So I'd always been around, different types of technology. Tried to teach myself a little bit about software development. I knew I kind of wanted to move toward technology in my career. I always kind of had that inclination, but I didn't really know how I was going to get there exactly. And then COVID happened. I just went through like a really rough time in my life, a lot of personal change. And so it was kind of a time for me to take a step back and look at my life and really kind of pursuing, what I thought was the best direction. And so at that time, kind of took a sort of temporary role doing online customer support. And I was really supporting like a SaaS web application type product in more of a customer service capacity because I kind of wanted to just get comfortable with that sort of client facing role, still doing some problem solving, but not as in depth. And during that time, I was going ahead and studying to get my CompTIA A+. And I went ahead and did that. And that's kind of when I started to move towards applying for actual IT jobs and landed my first one at GlobalMac IT, actually.
You have an interesting background, Dan. Like you mentioned you came from a marketing background and worked for SaaS companies. When you worked for marketing, is that when you had kind of an interest in going into IT?
Yeah, there was different little kind of signs, if I look back in my life where just there was significant moments of discovery. I think like, one of the big things is early on in my marketing career, I worked on like blockchain projects and studying like, the impact and the ideas behind blockchain technology. Also kind of coming out of the post Edward Snowden era, that, sort of information security and privacy, all that had a very deep sort of impact on my perception of the value of cybersecurity. And, it's not something I was like naturally drawn to, but those things just stuck out in my mind in such a profound way. And then working in marketing, using all the SaaS tools I was always kind of fascinated with automation. And so I kind of slowly more and more got interested in what automation could do in the work I was doing every day. And just the amount of problems you can solve in businesses with those kind of solutions. So there was always, different pieces and parts of things that was kind of preparing me. And then I kind of finally, got into an IT role in an MSP. And I felt like I had arrived at a place that I was sort of preparing for a much longer period of my life without realizing it. So it's kind of interesting how it all kind of came together.
I like that background because I get a lot of questions from folks, they're mechanics or they're working different industries and they see IT and cybersecurity as a space where it's like they like the idea of working remotely. They like that, they like that type of, work life balance, but they don't know, don't have a clear path to get example where you're at right now, Dan. Like if you were talking to yourself back in marketing, or even someone that works in marketing, but maybe might have an interest like you did going to IT, cybersecurity, what would you have told yourself back then?
Yeah, there's definitely probably a couple things that stick out. The first thing I'll say is like people like you creating content like this were really the heroes for me. I found guys like Network Chuck and John Hammond on
Oh,
YouTube,
there we
and
go.
I'm sure there's another half a dozen guys I could like think of. But that was really just an excellent resource for me because it's so intimidating, when you're trying to
Mhm.
like say, hey, I want to learn an entire different, field, and I don't really know where to start. So just kind of being able to passively absorb some of that content and hear about things you might have some interest in, and then getting more insight into that, I think it makes it a lot more approachable. So I would say definitely, if nothing else, if you're considering it, expose yourself to as much media, on that topic as possible. And then, the other side of it is, I think you are what you are no matter what type of work you're doing. And that's just something that I found in my career, which kind of it was interesting is even though I felt like I was trying to make this big change in the type of work I was doing, I still, at the end of the day, ended up doing very similar work, just in the IT field. So, even with new skills and new insights and new, um, tools, you might end up really kind of finding, and that's kind of the beauty of IT is there's such a
Mm.
wide array of roles and disciplines that are needed that you can, no matter what skill set you have to bring to the table, you can stay grounded in that and really build a career off of that without having to completely reinvent the wheel. So just know that that stuff is valuable as well.
Shout out to Network Chuck. Shout out to
Yes.
Network Chuck, Professor Messer, Mike
Yes, Professor
Myers,
Nestor.
all the IT Pro TV guys. I mean, yeah, no, I agree, Dan. Like when I was working in law enforcement, same experience as you did. I looked at IT as somewhere it's like, I don't want to necessarily work in law enforcement, at least the particular position I had all my life. And I was like, I looked up to guys at Network Chuck, Professor Messer, CompTIA A Plus studies, Network Plus, Security Plus, IT Pro TV guys, Ronnie, Dan, Wes, all those guys that were up over there. And it gave me encouragement, like, hey, I could actually do something like this. But no, I agree, Dan. Like those guys, really influential, and we definitely want to, kind of pass the torch along and inspire those that definitely want to get into this field because it's definitely a blessing to, especially nowadays where after COVID and working remotely. Like I remember working on prem, and it's like I couldn't imagine myself working full time remotely, and now here we are. You're the operations director for Alpha Omega Computer Consultants. Kind of explain your day by day workload.
Yeah, yeah, and this really kinda goes in the comment I made about how, even in a new field, you kinda are who you are. I kinda came from a lot of these sort of, operations type, coordination type roles. Either, I was running the marketing initiative for a company independently, in which case really, success fell on me in communicating all the pieces and coordinating all the pieces of that kind of was my wheelhouse. Even before that, years ago, I actually worked in media and like video production, and I was very
Nice.
much so in like the assistant director department of just making sure the production's running on time, on target, on budget. And so that's just stayed with me. As soon as I got into IT, the first role I got was IT service coordinator, and so that was kind of a combination of dispatch and a little bit of everything else, tickets, communications across departments, and that's kind of evolved to where I'm at now. And really, a day for me is really just based around sort of strategic communication across all departments. So if you're looking into IT jobs, you'll see something called a service delivery manager. And that's a big part of what I do, which is just making sure, hey, for the service level agreements that we have in place, the key sort of KPI metrics that we have in place for support to be efficient and to be working for our clients at the highest level. I'm checking into that. I'm looking at, how are we making that happen? Where are we falling short? And what do we need to do there? I'm also kind of communicating at like sort of the network administrative level. In the MSP model, we sometimes call that centralized services, where we have the person who's really kind of monitoring and managing the networks at a very high level. And so a lot of times that's a more of a big picture conversation of, hey, where do we need to move all of our clients? Because in an MSP, we work with we're basically the outsource IT provider for several different
Mhm.
companies in all kinds of different industries rather than an in-house sort of IT department. So it's, which of these solutions is applicable to all of our customers, which of them is, only applicable to one customer or the other. And then there's, also sort of the project management side for those guys we have out in the field that are going ahead, setting up firewalls and installing APs and, doing whatever else is needed on site, just kind of making sure that they're, sticking to a schedule and that we're delivering on those projects and we're able to kind of optimize how we're doing that work as well. So there's a lot of that goes on. But also
Mhm.
within my role, I'm also touching parts of marketing and sales, business development, a little bit of finance, sort of like figuring out, hey, if we're considering using a tool, what is the cost of that versus the value of that to our company, and how are we analyzing success? We've definitely adopted tools only to find out that it wasn't a good move, and sometimes you like to try to, have a system in place to figure that out before you spend the money. So a little bit of all that kind of goes into like what my day to day is, and then I report directly to the company president, and so me and him are very much kind of trying to figure out what is that next stage for the company from where we're at, and how do we get there with the resources we have.
That's awesome. Also shout to Brad Wolf, operations director at GlobalMac IT.
Brad was very much a mentor to me. Brad
Yeah.
very much set me up for success. I will say this to the people who listen to the podcast: if you ever get the opportunity to work at GlobalMac IT, if they've put out a job, I would encourage you to apply to it. It is definitely one of the best places you could start a career in IT. And yeah, being able to work alongside Brad, he actually hired me on. I worked there under him, and then he kind of sort of briefly took a role in a different position. We stayed in contact the whole time. He was just constantly a sort of resource for me, making sure that I understood the decisions I was making. I had the tools I needed to make the right choices, and we had some really kind of cool and interesting conversations around the things we were doing in our respective roles. And even to this day, yeah, we have a really great relationship. Love Brad; he's a great guy.
Oh no, that's awesome, and I think it's real important to have guys like you, Dan, and Brad. Guys kind of looking at a high level of everything, especially in the MSP model, where those who do work in IT and cybersecurity that are not familiar with MSP or MSSP, the outsourced IT, outsourced cybersecurity services platform. It's important to have guys like you, Dan, see everything at a high level, because sometimes if I'm stuck with a project I'm doing, I could go chat with the operations director, and he kind of steers me, or steers me in the right direction where I need to go and whatnot. And so the operations directors for these MSPs, MSSPs are really super important. They're definitely especially you, Dan. You're definitely a source of encouragement. When I work with you at Global Mac, I mean, and Brad's the same way. Guys like you are the same way, where it's like, yeah, I am the operations director, but you guys are also like the source of encouragement and guidance, and coaching. If you can, Dan, can you give a kind of a for those who do work in IT, maybe on prem? Can you kind of give a little brief synopsis on as a what is a MSP?
Yeah, so MSP, this technically stands for Managed Service Provider, and basically, that's an outsourced IT company. So, whereas a lot of times we will work with internal IT resources within companies, a lot of times people will just say, "Hey, this is either too big for us, or it's not effective for us to do it in house, or maybe we need some of the security solutions that our people
Mhm.
just aren't either particularly trained on or don't have the skill set for." And so we kind of work in both a supplemental role, but also a lot of times in a role of just being a direct provider in a way that makes sense for a company. And so again, when we do like a co-managed situation where we're working with maybe one, two, up to five, maybe internal IT guys, there's usually like a pretty clear sort of division of labor where it's like, here's the things you guys are going to do, and here's the things we're
Mhm.
going to do, and we're going to communicate very clearly on it. And so it usually works out really well because it saves us time and resources. And then internal IT, they kind of have the support they need to get certain things done. But also, very, very frequently we take on clients directly where we are the primary resource, especially with smaller companies, where just, from a cost basis, it doesn't make sense for them to necessarily have an in-house IT team yet. But a lot of times people when working with MSP, kind of evolve from that model and then be able to bring people in house. And good MSPs will, be supportive of that and help them get the right resources in place. So, yeah, it's definitely like an interesting thing because you always have different environments. So, when you're
True.
working for your company, your environment, your sort of user base. oftentimes are designing or implementing the group policies from the top down from your role. Especially if you're in like a network administrator type role. Whereas within an MSP, you're going into completely different environments with completely different sets of rules, completely different. Well, usually to start, anyways, completely different
Mm.
hardware and things like that. And then you're kind of working to try and over time help standardize that to what you work best with so the client can get the best end result.
Really good definition of MSP, because I get some folks, especially younger folks that are still in high school and college and LinkedIn asking me, hey, how do you get into working remotely? And so I always tell them, hey, look for MSP positions out there for different MSPs and whatnot. But no, that's a really good definition. I do have a question from a young man in New York. Actually, he asked, "What advice would you give to someone looking to break into the MSP industry?"
I think the best advice that I could give would be to kind of start from the ground up, like get in at any level you possibly can. And then once you can get in somewhere, learn as much as you can about what everyone else is doing. And when I say everyone else, I mean everyone else. All of the people on your team, all of the clients that you're working with, how are they doing their work? What tools are they using to do their work? How does that affect the sort of infrastructure of IT that they have and what you need to be able to do for them. Very much just kind of, and this kind of goes back to something you said about being a sort of operations person is very much the role I'm in now is a role of service, and I think it's
Mm.
making things easier for the people around you, anticipating their needs, meeting them where they're at, and kind of getting them around obstacles. That's ultimately what my role is. But I would say if you can start in IT in that role where you're just kind of saying, hey, how can I be useful? How can I save you some steps or some time? You will develop the habits of an excellent IT professional because so much of what we do is about anticipating needs and then eventually learning how to think upstream, right? You're doing sort of a root cause analysis of problems rather than just
Mm.
solving the tickets as they come in. You're starting to say, hey, there's an underlying issue here where we can, write a script or, change the way that we have this configured so that that problem doesn't reoccur. And now we're not just fixing problems, we're making them go away. And if you can do that as an IT person, you'll always be able to find work somewhere because that's the hardest, most time consuming part of the job. But when you do it well, it creates the biggest difference in the world. So I would say just get in there, be a good communicator, be a good listener, and starting to just ask people what they need, and then starting to get good at anticipating that. If you can do that, you'll be extremely valuable on any team, any role. That's definitely like the key, I think, to me.
Good diamonds, nuggets right there for someone that definitely, especially with this young man that wants to get into the MSP world. No, I agree, Dan. Like, I mean, I'm always learning things every day, but like, definitely working an MSP, it's definitely different. To also add to that, for the techs that do work on site and stuff on prem for different organizations, it's definitely different than working on prem. Although there are some times where you have to go on prem to the client site and do things and whatnot. Like Dan mentioned, learn as much as you can. Learn about, especially with cloud tools, MS365, Amazon, Google. Learn as much as you can because that's going to be your bread and butter right there as far as when it comes to working for MSPs and whatnot. Dan, what's your kind of favorite project to date?
There's a lot of good ones. I've been lucky to work with some really cool, intelligent people in every organization I've been with. But I guess kind of going back to my fascination with automation, I've always thought automation was the coolest part of technology. Uh, and of course, with AI now, in my mind, that's just kind of a more advanced type of automation, things autonomously
Mm.
in that way. And I got to kind of put together a full workflow for a user onboarding or offboarding process. And literally the entire thing was like scripted out. So the user would go ahead and submit a form. And then from that form, it would literally, create, the email account, give that account the license that it needed. It would pull from the vendor, give it the license it needed, configure any type of email groups that they need to be a part of, any type of like workflows that were necessary to their role. And it would go and put that user account in all my other systems. Assign the machine that they were kind of using to them, and just to kind of take something that could normally take. I mean, Mike, you've
Oh
done
yeah,
plenty of onboardings.
yeah,
Something that could take hours of time and really be able to distill
yeah.
the important, bigger picture parts of it to a matter of minutes, and then just to literally set it and forget it. That was super exciting for me. And
That's awesome.
doing it in offboarding, same thing. It's like I guess kind of as an IT guy, it's nice, especially from a security perspective, to have a kill switch
Mhm.
because sometimes people get terminated. It's not under the best terms. There are concerns with that, and to give the client the peace of mind and to give our organization a peace of mind that like we can basically hit a button or fill out a form really quickly and take all the critical services out of a vulnerable
Mhm.
position. It's a good feeling. It's a good tool to have in place, and I think everyone should work towards that kind of posture for security reasons.
It's super important. You mentioned about onboarding, offboarding, particularly. Yeah, I remember when we worked both together. It was that was my primary role as offboarding, onboarding, and yeah, there's sometimes where you get a ticket and point of contact that needs this person. Hey, this person's coming off, and it's a hard offboard where it needs to be done at this moment and stuff like that. So you're right, Dan. From a security perspective, if it's a troubled employee that's or user that's offboarding, you make sure those accounts are that user can access them and whatnot. Then the same with onboarding, making sure that employee is good to go from day one and getting all those things prepped. And it's amazing how automation, specifically with AI stuff, it's amazing how it make your job easier, like at least more efficient, I would say, like you mentioned. Dan, it's December 2024. Do you have any predictions for 2025 as far as in MSP world, maybe automation world, AI world? What's your prediction for 2025?
I think, I have a little bit of a unique insight from where I'm at. I work pretty closely with a lot of the vendors that are in our industry. So another kind of dynamic that's a little different from being in an on-prem thing is, so much of the time in an MSP, you work a little bit closer with your vendors. It's not just on a support basis, but it's,
Mhm.
they're trying to sell to you directly. They're trying to get advice from you directly because they want to know, hey, how is our tool really helping the industry? And so I do think, based on what I'm seeing, that AI is going to continue to be pervasive in our industry. I know it's kind of flopped a little bit or fallen short in some places. People were saying it's
Mhm.
not doing what we thought it would do, but for what we do, just sort of the sheer amount of data that we have to move around and to do that effectively and to do that in a way that really just kind of captures the essence of important parts and make sure that they're well documented. I'm seeing that continue to be a massive trend in our industry, and I think it's a good thing. I think as long as we're doing it responsibly and securely, I do think that right piggybacking off of that trend is the security around AI is going to become, a bigger and more important thing. You're probably going to see, some
Mhm.
very shocking exploits that take place, now that AI is so pervasive everywhere. And that's going to, people are going to have to respond to that. And I think in our industry, there's a lot of innovation around security. A lot of it, people are just looking at one problem and solving one problem really well. And I think AI security is going to produce a myriad of new problems. So that's going to kind of probably be an advent for a whole new sort of dimension of cybersecurity companies. So I'm kind of excited for what that holds in store. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think kind of to my point about the co-managed situation, I think that that's
Mhm.
going to become more popular in the MSP space. You're going to continue to have, organizations that are experiencing growth that want to have internal IT resources, but also kind of want to be able to punch above their weight class and get the value in areas of like, dedicated managed security or, dedicated network administration at a high level where things are kind of proactively being addressed. So I think that there's going to be a lot more of that kind of synergy going forward. And you'll probably see a lot more of the MSP companies working more direct with internal IT. That's my guess, anyways.
I hear different podcasts and different forums online, talking about AI and specifically with security. And I think you're right. The automation and AI, it makes sense. And how important is it for someone, Dan, for those that trying to get into the space, whether in IT or MSP? How important it is to kind of look further ahead to see what's going to happen or what predictions people have?
It's important to remember no one can really be the master of everything. There's always going to
True.
be a lot of things. I don't know networking as well as I'd like to, or I don't know certain security principles
Mhm.
or technologies as well as I might like to. But just to be aware of those things and to understand, what impact they have on the decisions that you're making and that the client makes if you're in that role. It's super important, right? Because people are coming to you, especially in an MSP. People are coming to
Mhm.
you almost as a consultant, as a trusted advisor. That's kind of why I like the company I'm with now. It kind of has the word
Mhm.
consultants in the name, but it really is they're coming to you and deferring on, hey, we heard about this AI thing, but like, what does that mean for us, right? And it's not their job to know, but if you're a technologist, it should be your job to know at least a good amount. And it's okay, to tell them like, hey, we're still figuring it out on our side, but here's the things that we're looking at now that you might be interested in. And just being creative and being able to implement that in what you're using, but also being cautious and not adopting things wholesale. Within technology, there's no such thing as a free lunch. A lot of times when you're getting
Mhm.
something, it comes at a security cost, and so just to kind of educate yourself and know the ramifications of those decisions, I think is the big picture thing there. But yeah, definitely, just know that people always look at you as the smart person in the room when it comes to technology in this sort of space. So just being able to have a competence in that and being grounded in what you do know and just knowing that bit very, very well, I think is the key.
Dan, if someone's trying to get a hold of you, reach out to you, ask for any career IT MSP advice, where can they find you at?
Yeah, LinkedIn is you nailed it, man. LinkedIn is my home base right now. So if you go to linkedin.com /my first name Dan Dan, and then the dash, and then my last name Umek, which is U M as in Mary EK. You can go ahead and add me on there, send me a message. I actually have a lot of younger, IT aspiring IT people kind of reaching out to me. And I'm happy to make
Nice.
time, to make just a quick chat or whatever you need. Yeah, the place to reach me.
And Dan, I have one last question for you. If you could program any device to bring you snacks on demand, what would it be and why?
Oh man, probably the Roomba because I'm a very messy eater, and then it could just stay there, and I'd keep it in like a holding loop, and then like I'd
Nice.
probably have it clean up after me when I'm done because it'd be a mess.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. No, yeah, it's those Roombas are really, really important. I think I have a Eufy and it does the same thing, but I don't have it on loop though. But it does the same
Yeah,
thing.
you have to do some custom modifications on that. We'll get your little Arduino set up and
There we go.
a little creative.
There we go. I need to hit you up for some automation stuff. That's what
Yeah,
I
man,
need to do.
anytime, anytime. I love talking automation.
That's awesome. No, Dan, thanks for being on the podcast, man. You dropped a lot of nuggets, especially those for those younger folks that are trying to get into the MSP space and didn't, may not have that much guidance, know how to get into into this profession, particularly in the MSP world. But I thank you for your time, Dan, and it was great, always great talking to you. Thanks for your time, appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael, man. It was a pleasure. I had a great time.
This is episode number 9, CyberTech Podcast, inside the minds of everyday IT and cyber pros. Daniel Umek, Operations Director of Alpha Omega Computer Consultants. See you guys next time.